Right now, as you're watching this video, millions of people around the world are suffering from emotional wounds that hurt far more than any physical injury they've ever experienced. A broken heart from rejection, crushing guilt from past mistakes, the devastating pain of failure, or the suffocating weight of loneliness. Yet while we wouldn't hesitate to treat a cut with a bandage or ice a sprained ankle, we completely ignore our emotional injuries, letting them fester and grow worse over time. Today, I'm going to change that forever by introducing you to a revolutionary approach that treats emotional pain with the same urgency and effectiveness as physical first aid. Here's what's absolutely mind-blowing. We live in a world where everyone knows basic physical first aid, but virtually no one knows how to treat emotional injuries. When someone gets a physical cut, we immediately clean it, apply antiseptic, and bandage it to prevent infection. But when someone experiences emotional trauma, rejection, guilt, failure, loneliness, we tell them to just get over it, think positive, or time heals all wounds. This approach is not just ineffective, it's actually dangerous because untreated emotional wounds create lasting psychological damage that affects every aspect of your life for years or even decades. Today I'm bringing you Emotional First Aid, Healing Rejection, Guilt, Failure, and Other Everyday Hurts by Dr. Guy Winch. This isn't just another self-help book filled with feel-good platitudes. This is a scientifically based psychological medicine cabinet that provides specific, proven treatments for the 7 most common emotional injuries that every human being will experience multiple times throughout their life. This book literally functions as an emergency room for your emotional well-being. In this video, I will walk you through Dr. Winch's complete emotional first aid system, giving you practical tools to immediately treat rejection, guilt, failure, rumination, loss, loneliness, and low self-esteem. By the end of this video, you'll have a complete psychological medicine cabinet that will prevent small emotional injuries from becoming major psychological problems. Suppose you commit to watching this entire presentation. In that case, I guarantee you'll never look at emotional pain the same way again. And more importantly, you'll know exactly how to heal it quickly and effectively. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Emotional First Aid. Point 1. Why emotional injuries are actually more dangerous than physical ones. Dr. Winch's groundbreaking research reveals that emotional injuries are often far more debilitating and long-lasting than physical injuries, yet we treat them with shocking neglect. When you break a bone, it heals completely within months and rarely affects you again. But emotional injuries like rejection, failure, or loss can create psychological scars that influence your behavior, relationships, and life choices for decades. A single incident of harsh rejection in childhood can create lifelong patterns of fear around intimacy. One significant failure can destroy confidence permanently. This happens because we don't treat emotional wounds immediately when they occur, allowing them to become infected with negative thoughts and limiting beliefs. Point 2. The revolutionary parallel between physical and emotional health. Just as physical first aid prevents minor cuts from becoming serious infections, emotional first aid prevents minor psychological hurts from becoming major mental health problems. Physical first aid follows a simple protocol: assess the injury, clean the wound, apply appropriate treatment, monitor for complications, and seek professional help if needed. Dr. Winch discovered that emotional injuries respond to exactly the same systematic approach. The problem is that society has conditioned us to ignore emotional pain, push through it, or pretend it doesn't exist, which is equivalent to letting a physical wound become gangrenous. The 7 universal emotional injuries. Through extensive clinical research, Dr. Winch identified 7 emotional injuries that every human being will experience repeatedly throughout their lifetime. Rejection, feeling excluded or unwanted. Guilt, self-condemnation for real or perceived wrongdoing. Failure, inability to achieve goals or meet expectations. Rumination, obsessive negative thinking. Loss and trauma, grief from significant life changes. Loneliness, feeling disconnected and isolated, and low self-esteem, negative self-perception, and lack of confidence. These aren't character flaws or signs of weakness. They're normal human experiences that require immediate treatment to prevent long-term psychological damage. Point 4. The symptoms that signal emotional emergency. Just as physical injuries have clear symptoms like pain, swelling, and bleeding, emotional injuries have predictable warning signs that indicate immediate treatment is needed. Rejection triggers intense emotional pain, difficulty concentrating, and obsessive thoughts about the rejecting person or situation. Guilt creates excessive self-criticism, shame spirals, and self-punishment behaviors. Failure leads to demoralization, learned helplessness, and avoidance of future challenges. Recognizing these symptoms early and treating them immediately prevents them from developing into serious psychological conditions like depression, anxiety disorders, or chronic low self-worth. Point 5. The cost of neglecting emotional wounds. When emotional injuries go untreated, they don't heal naturally like physical wounds. They actually get worse over time. Untreated rejection can evolve into social anxiety and fear of intimacy. Unresolved guilt can become chronic depression and self-hatred. Unhealed failure can create learned helplessness and destroy motivation permanently. Dr. Winch's research shows that most adult psychological problems can be traced back to untreated emotional injuries from childhood, adolescence, or early adulthood. The tragedy is that these major psychological problems could have been prevented with simple emotional first aid techniques applied immediately when the original injury occurred. Chapter 2. Rejection. The most painful emotional injury. Point 1. Understanding the devastating impact of rejection. Rejection is perhaps the most universally painful emotional experience because it directly attacks our fundamental need for belonging and acceptance. When we experience rejection, whether it's romantic rejection, social exclusion, job rejection, or family disapproval, our brains literally process this as physical pain, activating the same neural pathways that respond to physical injury. This is why rejection hurts so intensely, and why people often describe it as heartbreaking or gut-wrenching. The pain is real, measurable, and often more severe than physical trauma because it strikes at our core sense of worth and belonging. Point 2. The dangerous after-effects of untreated rejection. When rejection goes untreated, it creates a cascade of psychological damage that can last for years. First, it damages self-esteem by making us question our worth and desirability. Second, it triggers rumination, where we obsessively replay the rejection, trying to understand what went wrong. Third, it creates anticipatory anxiety about future rejection, making us withdraw from social situations and opportunities. Fourth, it can lead to what Dr. Winch calls rejection sensitivity, a heightened reactivity to any perceived signs of rejection, even in neutral situations. This hypersensitivity can destroy relationships and prevent us from taking necessary risks in love, career, and friendship. Point 3. Immediate treatment. Protocol for rejection. The moment you experience rejection, Dr. Winch recommends implementing immediate emotional first aid to prevent long-term damage. First, acknowledge that the pain is real and legitimate. Don't minimize it or tell yourself to get over it. Second, resist the urge to ruminate by deliberately redirecting your attention to activities that boost self-worth and confidence. Third, practice self-compassion by talking to yourself the way you would comfort a good friend experiencing the same pain. Fourth, actively rebuild your sense of social connection by reaching out to people who care about you and value your company. The self-esteem protection exercise, one of Dr. Winch's most powerful techniques for treating rejection, involves what he calls self-esteem protection. Immediately after experiencing rejection, write down 5 things you value about yourself that are unrelated to the rejection situation. If you were rejected romantically, focus on your professional accomplishments, friendships, talents, or personal qualities. If you were rejected professionally, focus on your relationships, hobbies, character traits, or past successes. This exercise prevents rejection in one area of life from contaminating your overall sense of self-worth. Point 5. Building rejection resilience for the future. Long-term recovery from rejection involves building what Dr. Winch calls rejection resilience, the ability to bounce back quickly from future rejections without suffering lasting damage. This involves regularly practicing self-compassion, maintaining a strong support network, diversifying your sources of self-esteem so that rejection in one area doesn't devastate your entire sense of worth, and developing a growth mindset that views rejection as information rather than condemnation. People with high rejection resilience actually recover from rejection faster and are more willing to take social and professional risks because they know they can handle potential rejection. Point 6. When professional help is needed, while emotional first aid can treat most rejection injuries effectively, Dr. Winch identifies warning signs that indicate professional help is needed. Seek therapy if rejection leads to clinical depression lasting more than 2 weeks, if you develop severe social anxiety that prevents normal functioning, if you engage in self-destructive behaviors like substance abuse or self-harm, or if rejection triggers thoughts of suicide. Additionally, if you find yourself unable to form new relationships or take appropriate risks months after a rejection, professional intervention may be necessary to address deeper psychological wounds. Chapter 3. Guilt, the self-inflicted emotional wound. Point 1. The double-edged nature of guilt. Guilt is unique among emotional injuries because it serves an important psychological function while simultaneously causing tremendous suffering. Healthy guilt motivates us to make amends for wrongdoing, learn from mistakes, and align our behavior with our values. However, excessive or misplaced guilt becomes a toxic force that can destroy self-worth, create chronic anxiety, and prevent us from living authentically. Dr. Winch distinguishes between appropriate guilt that leads to positive behavioral change and toxic guilt that serves no constructive purpose and only causes suffering. Point 2. The many faces of toxic guilt. Toxic guilt manifests in several destructive forms that require immediate treatment. Survivor guilt occurs when we feel bad about our success or happiness while others suffer. Separation guilt happens when we pursue independence or make choices that disappoint others. Disloyalty guilt arises when we disagree with family, friends, or groups we belong to. Responsibility guilt involves taking blame for things beyond our control, like other people's feelings or reactions. Each type of toxic guilt creates specific patterns of self-sabotage and prevents us from living according to our authentic values and desires. Point 3. The psychological damage of unresolved guilt. When guilt goes untreated, it creates profound psychological damage that affects every aspect of life. Chronic guilt leads to persistent self-criticism and negative self-talk that erodes confidence and self-worth. It creates anxiety and depression as we constantly berate ourselves for real or imagined wrongdoings. Guilt also drives self-punishment behaviors where we unconsciously sabotage our success, relationships, or happiness because we don't feel we deserve good things. Many people with unresolved guilt develop what Dr. Winch calls success allergies, an unconscious resistance to achieving their goals because they feel guilty about succeeding. Point 4. The guilt. First aid treatment protocol. Dr. Winch's guilt treatment protocol begins with accurate assessment of whether the guilt is appropriate or toxic. Appropriate guilt should motivate specific actions to make amends or change behavior, then naturally resolve. Toxic guilt serves no constructive purpose and should be treated immediately. The first step is practicing self-forgiveness through compassionate self-talk and recognizing your fundamental human right to make mistakes and learn from them. The second step involves setting healthy boundaries with people who trigger inappropriate guilt through manipulation or unrealistic expectations. The power of making effective amends. When guilt is appropriate and stems from actual wrongdoing, Dr. Winch emphasizes the healing power of making effective amends. This goes beyond simple apologies and involves taking concrete actions to repair damage, change problematic behaviors, and demonstrate genuine remorse. Effective amends include acknowledging specific wrongdoing without making excuses, expressing genuine remorse for the impact on others, taking concrete steps to repair any damage, and implementing changes to prevent similar problems in the future. This process not only heals relationships, but also resolves guilt by transforming it into positive action. Point 6. Breaking free from guilt-based self-sabotage. One of the most insidious effects of chronic guilt is unconscious self-sabotage, where we prevent ourselves from succeeding or being happy because we don't feel we deserve good things. Dr. Winch teaches specific techniques for recognizing and interrupting these patterns. This includes identifying guilt-driven behaviors like procrastination, people-pleasing, or avoiding opportunities. It involves challenging guilt-based thoughts with evidence-based reality testing. Most importantly, it requires practicing what he calls guilt immunity, the ability to pursue your authentic goals and happiness despite guilt-inducing messages from others or your own internalized criticism. Chapter 4. Failure. Transforming defeat into growth. Point 1. Redefining failure as information rather than identity. Dr. Winch's revolutionary approach to failure begins with fundamentally redefining what failure means. Most people treat failure as evidence of personal inadequacy, but research shows that failure is simply information about what didn't work, not a reflection of your worth or potential. Every successful person has failed repeatedly. The difference is that they learned to extract valuable information from failure rather than letting it define their identity. Failure becomes toxic only when we internalize it as proof that we are not good enough, smart enough, or capable enough to succeed. Point 2. The psychological devastation of untreated failure. When failure goes untreated through proper emotional first aid, it creates cascading psychological damage that can destroy motivation and potential permanently. The first casualty is self-confidence, as repeated failures without proper processing create learned helplessness, the belief that success is impossible regardless of effort. The second casualty is motivation, as the fear of future failure becomes so overwhelming that we stop trying altogether. The third casualty is our willingness to take necessary risks, leading to a progressively smaller and safer life that prevents us from reaching our true potential. Point 3. The immediate response protocol for failure. Dr. Winch's failure first aid protocol must be implemented immediately after any significant setback to prevent long-term psychological damage. First, allow yourself to feel the disappointment, frustration, and sadness that naturally accompanies failure. These emotions are normal and healthy. Second, resist the urge to engage in harsh self-criticism or global self-condemnation. Third, conduct what he calls a failure autopsy, objectively analyzing what went wrong without emotional judgment. Fourth, identify specific lessons learned and actionable insights that can improve future performance. Fifth, recommit to your goals with modified strategies based on new information. Point 4. The growth mindset transformation. One of Dr. Winch's most powerful failure treatments involves cultivating what psychologist Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset, the belief that abilities and intelligence can be developed through effort, learning, and persistence. People with growth mindsets view failure as temporary setbacks that provide valuable learning opportunities, while those with fixed mindsets view failure as permanent evidence of inadequacy. Developing a growth mindset involves regularly reminding yourself that current abilities are just starting points, that challenges are opportunities to grow, that effort and persistence lead to improvement, and that failure is a natural part of the learning process. Point 5. Building failure resilience through strategic exposure. Dr. Winch recommends building what he calls Failure resilience, by deliberately exposing yourself to small, manageable risks, where failure is possible but not devastating. This might involve trying new hobbies, applying for stretch opportunities, or attempting creative projects outside your comfort zone. Each small failure you handle successfully builds confidence in your ability to survive and learn from setbacks. This strategic exposure gradually desensitizes you to failure anxiety and proves that you can bounce back from disappointment stronger and wiser than before. Preventing failure from becoming self-fulfilling prophecy. One of the most dangerous aspects of untreated failure is how it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. When we expect to fail based on past experiences, we unconsciously sabotage our efforts, don't prepare adequately, or give up prematurely when challenges arise. Dr. Winch teaches specific techniques for breaking this cycle, including setting realistic but challenging goals, celebrating small victories along the way, maintaining detailed records of progress and achievements, surrounding yourself with supportive people who believe in your potential, and regularly visualizing successful outcomes while preparing for potential obstacles. Chapter 5. Rumination. Breaking the cycle of toxic thinking. Point 1. Understanding rumination as an emotional injury. Rumination is the psychological equivalent of picking at a physical wound. It prevents healing and makes the injury worse over time. Dr. Winch defines rumination as the tendency to repetitively focus on problems, negative emotions, or past events without moving toward solutions or resolution. While normal reflection and problem-solving are healthy, rumination is characterized by circular, unproductive thinking that increases distress without providing insights or solutions. It's like having a broken record playing the same painful song in your mind repeatedly, preventing you from moving forward with your life. Point 2. The addictive nature of negative rumination. One of Dr. Winch's most important discoveries is that rumination can become psychologically addictive because it provides the illusion of problem solving while actually making problems worse. When we ruminate, we feel like we're working on our problems, but we're actually reinforcing negative thought patterns and emotional distress. Rumination triggers the release of stress hormones that create physical tension and anxiety, yet the mind becomes convinced that more thinking will eventually lead to solutions. This creates a vicious cycle where increased rumination leads to increased distress, which triggers more rumination in a desperate attempt to find relief. Point 3. The devastating effects of chronic rumination. Chronic rumination creates severe psychological and physical health problems that require immediate intervention. Psychologically, rumination increases depression and anxiety, impairs decision-making abilities, reduces problem-solving effectiveness, and damages self-esteem through constant self-criticism. Physically, rumination triggers chronic stress responses that suppress immune function, disrupt sleep patterns, increase inflammation, and contribute to cardiovascular problems. Dr. Winch's research shows that people who ruminate excessively are significantly more likely to develop depression, anxiety disorders, and stress-related physical illnesses. Point 4. The immediate interruption technique. Dr. Winch's most effective rumination treatment involves what he calls pattern interruption, immediately disrupting rumination cycles the moment they begin. This requires developing awareness of rumination triggers and early warning signs, then implementing specific interruption techniques. These include the 2-minute rule, where you allow yourself exactly 2 minutes to think about a problem before deliberately shifting attention, engaging in absorbing activities that require full mental focus like puzzles or exercise, and practicing what he calls mental channel changing, consciously switching your attention to predetermined positive topics when rumination begins. Point 5. Transforming rumination into constructive problem solving. Not all repetitive thinking is harmful. The key is transforming unproductive rumination into constructive problem solving. Dr. Winch teaches a systematic approach that includes setting specific time limits for thinking about problems, focusing on actionable solutions rather than endless analysis of problems, writing down concerns to get them out of your head and onto paper, and scheduling designated worry time where you allow focused problem solving within strict time boundaries. This approach honors your need to process difficult situations while preventing the endless cycling that characterizes toxic rumination. Chapter 6. Loss and Trauma. Navigating Life's Inevitable Challenges. Point 1. Understanding the universal nature of loss. Loss is an inevitable part of human existence that everyone will experience multiple times throughout their lives. Yet most people are completely unprepared to handle loss in healthy ways. Dr. Winch emphasizes that loss comes in many forms beyond death of loved ones. It includes job loss, divorce, health problems, friendship endings, children leaving home, retirement, aging, and countless other transitions that involve letting go of something meaningful. Loss requires immediate emotional first aid to prevent it from becoming a traumatic injury that creates lasting psychological damage. Point 2. The difference between healthy grief and traumatic injury. Dr. Winch makes a crucial distinction between healthy grief, which is a natural healing process, and traumatic injury, which occurs when loss overwhelms our coping capacity and creates lasting psychological damage. Healthy grief involves acknowledging the reality of loss, experiencing appropriate emotions like sadness and anger, gradually adjusting to life without what was lost, and eventually finding ways to honor the loss while moving forward. Traumatic injury involves denial of loss, emotional numbness or overwhelming distress, inability to function normally for extended periods, and persistent symptoms that interfere with daily life months or years after the loss occurred. Point 3. Immediate first aid for fresh loss. When loss occurs, Dr. Winch recommends specific first aid techniques to prevent healthy grief from becoming traumatic injury. First, acknowledge the reality and significance of what you've lost without minimizing or rationalizing it away. Second, allow yourself to feel whatever emotions arise without judgment. Grief, anger, fear, relief, and guilt are all normal responses to loss. Third, maintain basic self-care routines even when you don't feel like it, as neglecting physical needs compounds emotional distress. Fourth, seek support from trusted friends, family members, or professionals rather than isolating yourself during vulnerable periods. Point 4. Preventing complicated grief through active processing. Dr. Winch identifies several warning signs that indicate loss is becoming complicated grief, requiring immediate intervention. Persistent denial of loss, complete emotional numbness lasting weeks, overwhelming guilt or anger that doesn't diminish over time, inability to accept support from others, complete disruption of normal routines for extended periods, or intrusive thoughts and images that prevent daily functioning. When these symptoms occur, active processing techniques become necessary, including professional counseling, support groups, grief rituals that honor what was lost, and gradual re-engagement with meaningful activities and relationships. Point 5. Post-traumatic growth and meaning-making. One of Dr. Winch's most hopeful discoveries is that properly treated loss can actually lead to post-traumatic growth, positive psychological changes that make people stronger, wiser, and more resilient than they were before the loss occurred. This growth involves developing deeper appreciation for life and relationships, increased awareness of personal strength and resilience, clarification of values and priorities, enhanced spiritual or philosophical understanding, and stronger connections with others who have experienced similar losses. The key to achieving post-traumatic growth is actively searching for meaning and lessons within the loss experience, while honoring the pain and sadness that accompany it. Chapter 7. Loneliness. Healing the epidemic of isolation. Point 1. Loneliness as a serious health threat. Dr. Winch's research reveals that loneliness is not just an uncomfortable emotion, but a serious health threat equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes daily in terms of its impact on mortality risk. Chronic loneliness increases the risk of depression, anxiety, cardiovascular disease, immune system dysfunction, cognitive decline, and early death. Yet society treats loneliness as a character flaw or personal weakness, rather than recognizing it as a legitimate health emergency requiring immediate treatment. This stigma prevents people from seeking help for loneliness, allowing it to become a chronic condition that destroys quality of life and overall health. Point 2. The vicious cycle of chronic loneliness. Loneliness creates a self-perpetuating cycle that becomes increasingly difficult to break without intervention. When people feel lonely, they often withdraw from social situations, becoming more selective about social interactions and more sensitive to perceived rejection or criticism. This social withdrawal reduces opportunities for connection, which increases feelings of loneliness, which triggers further withdrawal. Additionally, chronic loneliness can make people seem needy or desperate in social situations, which can repel others and confirm their fears about being unlovable or socially inadequate. Immediate treatment for acute loneliness. Dr. Winch's loneliness. First aid protocol focuses on taking immediate action to create meaningful connections rather than waiting for loneliness to resolve naturally. This includes reaching out to existing friends or family members, even when you don't feel like it, participating in structured social activities like classes, volunteer work, or hobby groups where connection happens naturally around shared interests, and practicing what he calls social first aid. Small, low-risk social interactions like chatting with cashiers, greeting neighbors, or complimenting strangers that help rebuild social confidence. Point 4. Building sustainable social connection. Long-term recovery from loneliness requires building what Dr. Winch calls social fitness, the skills and habits necessary to create and maintain meaningful relationships. This involves developing genuine interest in others through active listening and empathy, practicing vulnerability by gradually sharing more personal information as relationships deepen, learning to give and receive emotional support effectively, and investing time and energy in relationships even when you don't feel like it. Similar to maintaining physical fitness through regular exercise, regardless of motivation levels. Chapter 8. Low self-esteem. Rebuilding your inner foundation. Point 1. Understanding self-esteem as psychological infrastructure. Dr. Winch conceptualizes self-esteem as the psychological infrastructure upon which all other aspects of mental health depend. Just as physical buildings require solid foundations to remain stable, psychological well-being requires healthy self-esteem to weather life's challenges without collapsing. Low self-esteem makes every other emotional injury more severe and harder to heal because you lack the internal resources necessary for resilience. People with healthy self-esteem recover from rejection, failure, and loss more quickly because they have a stable sense of worth that isn't easily shaken by external events. Point 2. The difference between self-esteem and self-confidence. One of Dr. Winch's important distinctions is between self-esteem, your overall sense of worth as a person, and self-confidence, your belief in your ability to handle specific situations or tasks. You can have high confidence in certain areas while having low overall self-esteem, or vice versa. Healthy self-esteem provides a stable foundation that allows confidence to recover quickly after setbacks, while low self-esteem makes confidence extremely fragile and difficult to maintain when challenges arise. Point 3. Immediate self-esteem. First aid techniques. When self-esteem takes a hit from criticism, failure, or rejection. Dr. Winch recommends immediate first aid to prevent lasting damage. This includes practicing self-compassion by speaking to yourself with the same kindness you would show a good friend, focusing on personal strengths and past accomplishments that are unrelated to the current situation, engaging in activities where you feel competent and capable, and surrounding yourself with supportive people who see and appreciate your positive qualities rather than those who consistently criticize or undermine you. Point 4. Building long-term self-esteem resilience. Sustainable self-esteem requires ongoing maintenance through specific practices that Dr. Winch calls self-esteem hygiene. This includes regularly acknowledging your efforts and progress rather than only focusing on outcomes, celebrating small victories and personal growth, maintaining realistic expectations that account for normal human limitations and learning curves, and developing a values-based sense of worth that comes from living according to your principles rather than depending entirely on external validation or achievement. Final conclusion. Point 1. Your emotional first aid kit is now complete. You now possess a complete emotional first aid kit containing scientifically proven treatments for the 7 most common psychological injuries. Just as you wouldn't ignore a physical wound and let it become infected, you now have the tools to treat emotional injuries immediately before they develop into serious psychological problems. Remember that emotional first aid, like physical first aid, is most effective when applied immediately after injury occurs. So don't wait for emotional wounds to heal naturally. Take active steps to treat them right away. The importance of emotional hygiene. Dr. Winch's revolutionary concept of emotional hygiene means paying as much attention to your psychological health as you do to your physical health. This includes regular emotional check-ins to identify developing problems, immediate treatment of emotional injuries when they occur, ongoing practices that build emotional resilience and strength, and seeking professional help when problems exceed your ability to self-treat. Make emotional hygiene as routine as brushing your teeth or exercising. Your psychological well-being deserves the same consistent care you give your physical health. Point 3. Your action plan. Starting today, begin implementing emotional first aid immediately by identifying which of the 7 emotional injuries most affects your life currently. Then apply the specific treatment protocols outlined in this video. Create an emotional first aid plan for future injuries by writing down the key techniques for each type of wound and keeping them easily accessible for times of crisis. Most importantly, start practicing emotional hygiene daily through self-compassion, regular emotional check-ins, and immediate treatment of small emotional injuries before they become major psychological problems. Your emotional well-being is not a luxury. It's a necessity for living a fulfilling, resilient, and successful life.